want a sick day, you need to go to the doctor and get a doctor's note, and then we'll give you 50% of your pay. Or then it's unpaid, but you won't get fired. That is ridiculous. Hey everyone, it's Rochelle from Adventures Around Asia, and today we are going to be talking about Teach Abroad contracts. Specifically, 5 things that you need to look for in your Teach Abroad contract so that you don't get scammed teaching abroad in China. And I would say that is just the number one worry that people always come to me about. It's how do I find an awesome high-paying job, and how do I make sure that I don't get scammed? I mean, I get emails, Facebook messages, blog comments, tons and tons and tons of people coming to me asking me, okay, how do I make sure that my job is legitimate, that I don't get scammed? And one of the easiest ways to do this, one of the easiest ways to check, is to really analyze your Teach Abroad contract. Okay, so today we are going to do a deep dive into 5 things that you can easily do when you check your Teach Abroad contract to make sure that you don't get scammed teaching abroad in China. But before we get into the training, I just want to mention again, I do have a free guide, 10 steps to landing a high-paying job in China that's not a scam. Now, if you don't already have this guide, I highly recommend downloading it. You can grab it just by scrolling and clicking the link below. If you are at all still looking for a job in China, you're gonna want this guide. But anyway, all right, let's get into it. The 5 things that you should look for in your Teach Abroad contract to make sure that you do not get scammed. Now, the reason why Teach Abroad contracts are so important is because China is a contractual society, okay? Contracts in China are a big deal, even more so than they are here in the US, all right? Everything in China revolves around contracts, and you do actually have legal rights in China if you are working legally, right? If you meet all the legal requirements, and if you don't know if you do, watch my video on that. But if you meet all the legal requirements and you are teaching legally and you have a contract, that contract is legally binding, and it can be what really helps you if you get into a sticky situation in China. If your school's not treating you fairly, your contract can be what you can actually use to get yourself out of that situation. Contracts are super legally binding in China, which is why you want to make sure that your contract is fair. Because if you have an unfair contract, this can really be what bites you in the butt with your job in China. I have so many people coming to me saying, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that was in my contract, or I can't believe I agreed to that. And even I, my first year in China, signed a horrible contract that said I could owe my school up to $6,000 US if I wanted to leave early. It was a mess. So this is why it's really important to read and reread and reread your contract in China. Okay, so here are my 5 tips to make sure that you end up with an awesome contract that you love. Now, in my program, Teach Abroad Squad, I actually have like a multi-hour video where I go through the good jobs checklist and I talk about all these things that you need to look for in your contract, and then I analyze like 3 real contracts on the screen and point to like what's good and what's bad. But I mean, like, let's be real, you're on YouTube, you do not have time for that. So these are my 5 basic tips to at least get you started, to make sure you don't fall into any complete disasters, all right? So let's get into it. Tip number 1. The first thing that you really need to look into is your salary and your housing, okay? All of the finances of your contract. And that is kind of the first thing that everybody looks at, right? What's my salary? How much am I getting paid? But this can actually be a little bit tricky in China, mainly because in China, some contracts talk about your salary before tax, others talk about your salary after tax. And how do you know what your taxes are? Do they pay your taxes? Do you pay your taxes? So in the past, it was pretty standard for most contracts to give you your salary after tax. That means they've already paid all the taxes. This is your take-home salary. But now it's getting more and more common to give you a salary before tax. And then some jobs tell you your monthly salary, other jobs tell you your yearly salary. You gotta do some math. What are the taxes anyway? So firstly, you need to make sure when you're comparing jobs that you're comparing apples to apples and not apples to oranges, and that you are comparing a monthly salary after tax rather than one salary before tax, one salary after tax, and then it gets confusing and you don't know what the better deal is. So if they give you your salary before tax, you should go to them and say, hey, roughly what's my take-home salary gonna be after taxes? So for example, my job as a college counselor in China gave me my salary before tax. At one point, I was making 20,000 RMB per month before tax, but after tax, my take-home salary was around 17,400. Okay, so that's really important to know because that is pretty big difference, right? So if you're comparing jobs, you want to make sure that you're actually comparing the salaries accurately. And this is the same with housing stipends and provided housing. Most jobs in China, especially in the education industry, they will provide you housing or a housing stipend. So now it's up to you, and I'm sure I'll do a video on this in the future, but obviously you need to decide, right? Do I want them to just give me an apartment, or do I want a housing stipend to choose my own place? Now, housing stipends are a bit more complicated, obviously, because you need to pay rent and stuff, but you need to make sure that you're comparing that accurately when you're comparing jobs. So for example, one job might lump your housing stipend in with your salary. Another job might not even have any housing provided whatsoever. And a third job is giving you a free apartment. You need to make sure that you factor in the cost of housing when comparing these jobs to make sure that you're getting a good deal. Because you might look at one salary and go, oh my gosh, this is amazing. They're offering me 18,000 a month. And then another job's only offering me 15. But the other job offering you 15 gives you free housing, and the job offering you 18 gives you nothing. And then you have to think, okay, wait, but how much are apartments in this city, right? How much is that going to cost me? Because if you're in a smaller city, 3,000 RMB per month is more than enough to get your own apartment, and then boom, the salaries are on par. But if you're in Beijing, that's enough to get a bedroom in a shared apartment downtown. Okay, so it really depends on where you're staying and if that's going to work for you. So be sure that you look into housing when you're comparing salaries to make sure that you're getting a good deal. And now finally, in regards to housing, if you do have a housing stipend, you need to ask your job how your housing stipend works, right? So most apartments in China, you need to pay 5 months rent up front. That is crazy, especially if you're living in Beijing or Shanghai and the rent is very expensive. Now, that is a 1-month deposit, which will be reimbursed, hopefully, at the end of your stay, if you stay for the whole year. A 1-month non-refundable agency fee if you get your own apartment and work with a real estate agent. That is a thing in China. I really do not like it, but that you cannot rent directly in China. It's very difficult. So a 1-month non-refundable agency fee, and then 3 months rent. And in China, you pay your rent 3 months at a time. So you move in, you pay 3 months, and then 3 months later, you pay for the next 3 months, okay? So as you can see, this is probably gonna be a huge issue for you if you don't have a lot of money laying around. 5 months rent up front. So you need to ask your job, okay, how does this work? Are you gonna pay the 5 months rent up front for me? Or do I need to come up with this? Because some companies, they only pay you your housing stipend month by month. So you get there in September and they give you 1 month's rent, but you need 5 months rent, right? And they sometimes even give it to you at the end of the month, right? So you're there with your startup costs and you need 5 months rent up front, and they're not even gonna give you 1 month of your housing stipend until you've already worked for a month. Ooh, that's a lot of money, right? Especially if you're in Beijing or Shanghai and your rent is $800, $900 a month. Ooh, that is a lot. Now, some companies and schools will give you a no interest loan, okay? Others will say, hey, we'll cover your 5 months rent up front, or we'll cover 4 months rent up front for you, and you need to come up with a deposit or something like that. So you just need to be prepared about how much money that you need to actually bring. So if you have a housing stipend, be sure that you ask. Now, the second thing that you really need to look for is benefits. What are your benefits, right? In addition to housing, do you have vacation time, sick days, flight reimbursement? And not only do you have them, but are they good? When will you be reimbursed, right? So it's very common in China to have flight reimbursement or free flight to China. But now I'm seeing more and more contracts where they're not reimbursing you for this flight until the end of your contract, which means that you need to pay the $600, $700 up front, and you don't get reimbursed until 6 months in, 1 year in. So you need to front that money before you arrive in China. Now, this did not used to be the case, all right? When I first started teaching in China, I was reimbursed within a month or two. And now I'm seeing so many contracts saying, oh, we'll reimburse you for the first half of your flight, 6 months through your contract, and then the second half of your flight home, we'll pay for it at the end of your contract, we'll buy it for you. Now, this is becoming more and more common, and I understand why they do it. They want to make sure that you actually last like 6 months before they pay for your flight over. But it is something where if you don't have a lot of money lying around, that could be a major issue for you, especially if you're like me. When I first went to China, I actually borrowed the money from my family to get that first flight to China, and then I couldn't afford to pay them back right away, so I had to use that out of my salary to pay them back, and then I didn't get reimbursed for my flight until 6 months in. So you need to be really sure, okay, is my flight reimbursement enough to cover my flight to China, right? How much exactly is it? And when are they reimbursing me, okay? Be sure to read the details on this. Another one that I'm seeing a lot now is sick days, not getting any paid sick days. What?
Seriously?
Like, if you are moving from the US, UK, Australia, Canada, wherever, to China, you are going to get sick. It's gonna happen. You're gonna eat something that doesn't agree with you. You're gonna randomly get like bronchitis or tonsillitis just because there's so many germs and bacteria and people and pollution that your body's just not used to. And that is just a fact of life, okay? Pretty much whenever I change climates, I get sick. It's just how it works. So even if you're just one of those people who never gets sick, you're gonna eat something and you're gonna need to be on the toilet for the entire day. It's gonna happen. So you need sick days, right? I personally feel like every contract should come with at least like 5 paid sick days for the year. But now I'm seeing more and more contracts that offer 0 paid sick days. The worst part is I'm seeing contracts that say, if you want a sick day, you need to go to the doctor and get a doctor's note, and then we'll give you 50% of your pay. Or then it's unpaid, but you won't get fired. That is ridiculous. I do not think that you should ever have to go get a doctor's note to prove that you were sick, especially in China. Because guess what? Let's say I eat something wrong, I need to spend the entire day on the toilet. I do not want to go to the doctor for him to tell me that I have diarrhea. I know that I have diarrhea. I don't need anybody to tell me that I have diarrhea. I know, right? So why would I get up off the toilet and go to the doctor for him to tell me something that I already know? I should just be able to take a selfie and be like, hey, right? Like, I really disagree with doctor's notes. I also disagree with not getting paid for your sick days. I mean, I've seen some companies say, oh, if you're sick, that counts as one of your vacation days, and then you only get like 5 vacation days. No, okay, so this is something, we're gonna talk about this in another video, but this is something that you can and should definitely negotiate, because I think it's absolutely ridiculous. I feel like you should at least get 5 days of paid vacation, or at least like 50% pay and no doctor's note or something, because it's absolutely ridiculous that you get 0 paid sick days in a salaried job for a year. Now, finally, another thing that you want to look for in your benefits is vacation time. Now, vacation time varies widely between what type of job that you take. For example, if you work in a Chinese public school, you get a lot of paid government holiday leave time. For example, longer Chinese New Year breaks, school breaks, potentially even the entire summer off, either paid or unpaid. You have to look at your contract to see what it is, but you will get a lot more time off. But chances are you don't really get any paid vacation days. Maybe if you work in an international school or like a fancy job, you might get some paid vacation time, but typically you get so much time off as a public school teacher, they don't give you any paid vacation days. And it can even be difficult to take unpaid vacation time. So if you really need to be home at a certain time for a certain person's wedding, something you probably want to ask when you're negotiating your contract. Now, if you work at a training center, chances are you will get the Chinese government office holidays off work. They're still pretty good. Not as much as public schools, but you definitely get some time off, for National Week, Chinese New Year, May Day. There are a few different holidays and festivals where you get like a 3-day weekend or a week off, or maybe if they're nice, a day off for Christmas. So you get this vacation time, not as much as a public or private school. But many of these companies, these for-profit training centers, they will give you some vacation days. Now, the better ones will give you at least 5, if not 10 paid days off. I actually worked at a place that gave me 20 paid days of vacation, which was amazing coming from the US. Probably not if you're from Europe, but at least for the US it was great. But many other schools won't offer you any paid vacation days, which I think is kind of a rough deal, right? Because if you work at a public or private school, you get all this time off. You work in a training center and you get 0 paid days of vacation aside from the government office holidays. That's not so good, right? So you want to see if you can at least get like 5 days paid vacation, and then also check and see if you can get unpaid vacation as well. Because if you're coming to China, you probably want to travel, right? Like you probably want to see China and take some time off and travel around. And you may need to fly home for a friend's wedding or Christmas if you can get it off, or whatever else you need to fly back for. So you need to make sure that you can actually get unpaid vacation time if you're in a training center. Now, if you really want to go home for Christmas or something like that, a training center is probably your best bet because, like I said, public and private schools, you get a lot of time off, but you don't necessarily get any say about when that time off is. So just be sure that you double check, that you look for vacation days, you look for when they're reimbursing your flight, you look for sick days and how that works, because this is something that can really impact you. And if you just sort of blindly sign the contract, you're gonna be sorry. Now, number 3, and this is probably the most important one, and I know what you're thinking, what can be more important than your salary? It is your escape clause. This is the most important part of your contract. It's what you need to do if you hate your school and you want to leave and go work somewhere else, or you want to leave and go home. Now, it's not called this in the contract, but basically this is the part of your contract that tells you, okay, this is how you get out of the contract. Now, I'm sure most of you are thinking like, okay, I signed a contract, I'm not gonna quit, I don't wanna switch to another job, why do I care about this? You care because it is your only protection if for some reason you hate your school and wanna switch. If something goes wrong, if you're like, I don't like this, I hate this, I wanna go somewhere else, you need a fair escape clause to help you get out of your contract and move on to another school in China. For example, when I signed up and I ended up teaching at that school in the middle of nowhere where I was the only foreigner for miles on a factory-lined highway, I was not a fan, and I was finding all of these other better jobs in China, and I couldn't switch because if I wanted to switch, I could owe my school up to $8,000 US, which was my entire salary for the entire year, so that was cool. But anyway, you just want to make sure that your escape clause is fair and makes sense, that it really outlines the process that you need to go through in order to switch jobs. And switching jobs in China is not like it is back home, at least not for me in the US. You can't just give 2 weeks notice, okay? They went through so much of an effort to get you to China and get you your visa. And getting a teacher to come to China takes a lot of time. So you need to figure out what's fair, what makes sense. I mean, I've seen anything from like giving 2 to 3 months notice, or having to pay back, your flight over and giving 1 month notice. So there are various things that you can do to get out of your contract. You just need to make sure that it's fair and that it's reasonable, okay? Nothing that's like your entire salary for the entire year or that it makes it impossible to leave, okay? Just make sure that it's, giving them, a couple months notice, or you need to pay a little bit of money, and make sure that it's not vague, okay? I've seen some contracts where it's like you need to pay all of the fees to get the new teacher to China, and I'm like, what kind of fees? Am I paying for their flight? Like, am I paying for their visa? Am I paying you to find a recruiter to find them? And if so, is that going to be like $2,000? Like, what are you talking about? So if it's vague, make sure that they make it specific. Now, number 4, you want to make sure that your contract is super clear. I have seen some very basic, vague, short contracts in my day, and some of them are like, this is just a job offer, but it's like, I want to know what I'm getting myself into before I sign this, right? Like, what is your escape clause? Is your job description clear? Do they tell you what day of the month that you get paid? So if you're getting paid late, you can be like, hey, you said I was getting paid on the 15th. It is now the 18th. Where is my paycheck? You really want them to be as specific as possible, and it can be very dense and hard to get through, but trust me, you are going to want it to be super specific, because if they are not paying you on time or providing you the things that they offered, you can go in and literally highlight your contract and hand it to them and say, look, right? This happened to me in my first job. I was getting paid late all the time, and it wasn't just me, it was all of the Chinese colleagues that I had as well. And then when I asked, they were like, oh, that's just, we have to wait for the accountants to be finished. I think it's because many of the teachers, they took on extra study hall hours and got paid differently. So whatever it is, we had to wait for the accountants to be finished. And eventually I was like, this is BS, right? So I went in and I highlighted my contract, and it says here, I get paid, on the 10th of the month. And when I brought the contract to them and pointed it out, they went, oh, and guess who was paid on time every month? Just me. I was the only person in the entire school who was paid on time every month. So that was kind of awkward, but at least I got paid on time. You also want to check for details like what happens if the school doesn't hold up their end of the bargain, right? Because of course they're going to put in there, oh, if you want to quit early, or if you don't do this, or you don't show up on time, we get to X, Y, and Z. But what happens if they don't hold up their end of the bargain? There better be something in there about if they don't pay you on time, or if they're not providing you this, or if they don't do that, what do you get, right? You want to check for those parts of the contract as well. Make sure that they're super specific. And number 5, this is something that people just really don't think about or don't think to check, but that is, you want the school at the top of your contract to be the school that's on your work visa, which is also the school that you are working for. And this might sound super confusing, but basically you need to make sure that the contract and your work visa are for the school that you are actually working for. Because guess what? In China, that's not always the case. For example, my school in the middle of nowhere, that high school that I work for, they were not legally allowed to hire foreign teachers. So I signed a contract and got a work visa for a different school that was legally allowed to hire foreign teachers. And my school was basically just asking them for a favor. So that's cool. So I was working for a school that was not the school on my contract, and I didn't even notice at first. It wasn't until later where I was like, what's this? I looked at the school and I was like, that's not the school I'm working for. So it can be really confusing because you don't think also the names of schools can also be kind of weird, and like maybe you're working for a company and the name of the school is a little bit different, and you just ask. If the name of the school that you are at is not the name of the school on your contract, you need to figure out what's going on, because here's what happens if you're doing what I did. You can get deported, all right? Not technically deported, you can get sent home, but that actually happened to one of my friends who was living in Ningbo with me. Her school was doing the same exact thing as me. She was working for a school that was not the school that was on her contract. And guess what? The local government found out, and she was sent home and said, look, you're not in trouble. You didn't understand what was happening, but you cannot stay in China on a work visa for this school because you're not working for this school. So you can go home, find a new job, reapply, and come back to China. You're not in trouble, but you have to go home. And they sent her home halfway through her year in China, which really messed things up for her because she only had 1 year off to do this, and she only got 6 months. Now, thankfully, I was never caught, but after that happened, after my friend was sent home, I was really worried about getting caught. So I would definitely make sure, if for some reason the school that you were working for is not the school on your contract, say something sooner rather than later, because it is totally illegal and you can totally get in trouble for this. So that's a good way to work illegally, even though you meet all of the legal requirements without even knowing what's happening. So yeah, be careful. Now, I know that this is a little bit scary, right? Going through all of these things, ways that you can get scammed, but I'm just saying, listen, you really, really want to be aware of what you're signing when it comes to any job, but specifically when it comes to jobs in another country like China that really prioritize contracts. Now, the school, when they make a contract, they're looking out for their best interests. They want to make sure that they don't get screwed over, that you don't show up and then 2 weeks later decide, oh, I want to go teach at this other school that my friend's at. You just need to make sure that the contract also represents you, okay? So don't think of it as a scary thing. Think of it as an opportunity to make sure that the job is going to fit you, because the contract can also benefit you. The contract should say, hey, here's what happens if your school doesn't pay you on time. Here's what happens if the school doesn't provide you, the housing stipend that they promised. Okay, this is your opportunity to also look out for your own self and your own interests. But if for some reason this is a little bit intimidating, or you just want a little bit of extra help, or you want some extra eyes to look over your contract, I actually do personalized contract coaching and consultations as part of my Teach Abroad Squad program. And basically what they can do is they can send me a couple contracts and I'll look them over and I'll tell them, okay, I like this job, I don't like this. Why don't you negotiate this part of your contract? Why don't you ask them about this part of your housing stipend? You know, I go through it with them and I actually tell them, okay, in this part of your contract, this bothers me, or maybe we should fix this. Why don't you ask them about this? So it is really great to have an experienced teacher look over the contract with you. So if you don't have like a lawyer friend or a friend who's good at contracts or somebody teaching about in China already, I definitely recommend, if you need a little bit of extra help, look into joining Teach Abroad Squad and we can go through all of that together. Now, the best way to join, the best way to figure out when we're open, when we're closed, is just to download my free guide, 10 Steps to Landing a High-Paying Job in China. The link is below. And then you'll get in my email list and I will let you know as soon as the program is open. Now, if you need help with your contract right now and it's super urgent and you don't have time to wait for Teach Abroad Squad to open up because you need to get back to your school like within the next 2 days, like yesterday, and you just need some help right now, that's fine. Just download the guide below, and then when I send you the email with the guide, just respond to that email and say, hey Rochelle, I need urgent help right now. And then I could set up a private coaching call with you. I can send you the prices for that. No big deal. So if it's super urgent, just download the guide, respond to the email, and then we can get you set up with some short-term coaching. Now, finally, I want to know, is there anything that I've left out? Do you have a crazy story about your contract in China? Is there something that you want to tell me that you signed that you wish you didn't? Be sure to leave a comment below because I would love to hear your stories and get some more examples of crazy contracts or good contracts in China. And if you haven't already, be sure to like the video, send it around to your friends that you think it could help, and definitely subscribe to get more awesome China, expat life, and Teach Abroad content from me. That's all. Bye.